Never is the title of this week's episode. It is April 6th. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk, Josh Park, Zach Lang. Nation Dan has been replaced by, which way do I point? That way. He has been replaced by that picture, that text that says next game tomorrow at 3 versus Ottawa, because Nation Dan couldn't make it. Sorry we couldn't get this out earlier. Technology, am I right? But we are here now, and we are ready to talk a little Edmonton Oilers. I'll start with you, Zach Lang. The game last night, a blown lead in the third period for the Oilers. They've been very good in the third period all season, but recently it feels like they're making a little bit of a habit of blowing games late. Are you concerned at all?
I'm not overly concerned in the grand scheme of things. I mean, these sort of things happen. I mean, at the very least, Edmonton was able to hold on and eke out a point in overtime. Montreal as a whole, though, is a team that's kind of scaring me. I know last week we talked about the teams that we fear the most in the North, and I think Montreal's quickly climbed up to the top for me. Edmonton seems to be struggling at playing the Montreal style of game. And I hate this cliche, but Montreal's that workhorse team, the lunch pail types, right? And Edmonton just doesn't seem to be able to play with that for whatever reason right now. I mean, what was it? 2 shots in the first 18 minutes of the game is embarrassing. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be kind of interesting to see the way the rest of it plays out.
The Habs know how to suppress shots and just keep the Oilers out of it. It's impressive. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube if you want to have your take on the game. Josh Park, what do you think of a loss for the Oilers? Another one against the Habs.
Yeah, all of a sudden last week when we were talking about what teams we would want the Edmonton Oilers to face in the first round, and I'll admit I was one of the people that said, yeah, I wouldn't mind the Canadians. And now all of a sudden that's 2 games in a row. Of course, this one a little bit different than the one where they got hammered last week. But yeah, blowing a lead in the third period, something we haven't really seen from this Edmonton Oilers group this year. So a sign for concern, I wouldn't necessarily say that, but yeah, obviously, I guess there's a little bit of concern when you blow a third period lead to a team that you potentially could be meeting in the playoffs. But yeah, I don't know, an opportunity tomorrow to kind of bounce back after a tough go, but they're still on a heater. We're still trending in a good direction if you're the Edmonton Oilers. Yeah, I mean, this whole, basically since they went 3-6, it's kind of been a heater. I know there was the 3 straight losses to Toronto, but for the most part, they've just been kind of, they've been rolling. They've been rolling at a rate we really haven't seen them a lot in recent years. The one thing this does for me is I don't think there is anything to be played for down the stretch in the North Division. I think no matter which way you dice up these playoff positions, each series is going to be 50-50. Maybe some combinations are 55-45, but for the most part, I just think it's going to be these 4 teams in some weird combination. If you want home ice, you can have home ice and play for home ice. But Zach, am I insane for saying there's not really a lot to be played for here?
Not at all, really. I mean, I think we know the 4 playoff teams right now: Toronto, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Montreal. So, however it shakes out, I don't really think there's going to be major implications. Maybe Edmonton would prefer to play Winnipeg in the first round a little bit versus Montreal or Toronto. But at the end of the day, it is what it is at this point, right?
We're all bettors on this show, and we spent our little 10-minute preamble basically just talking about who we're betting on at the Masters, not talking about hockey at all. But Josh, when you look at the combinations of playoff series, whether it's Edmonton, Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, however it's diced up, is there one combination where, from a betting perspective, you'd be I would hammer this team in this situation? Or are you like me, where I'm every combination's like a coin flip?
Well, I think really the only thing you can be sure of in almost any of these combination of playoff series is that it's likely going to go 6 or 7 games.
Yeah.
They're going to be deep series, each and every one of them. I feel like at this point, the only one that you could really say, okay, I'm confidently putting my money on this team in any series would be, I think that if Toronto ended up meeting, Montreal in the first round, I think I could confidently say that Toronto's probably going to come out on top in that series. But at the same time, we've seen Montreal do a great job of being able to, blanket some of the superstars, especially on the Oilers, and who's to say they could do the same thing against the Leafs. So really, if I was betting, the only thing I'd be betting in any of these series is that it's going to go 6 or 7 games, because these are tightly matched teams, and we're seeing it right now with the way that this playoff race coming down the stretch is kind of separated into a group of 4 at the top.
Even a Toronto-Montreal series, I just sit there and I'm hey, Carey Price is not, the elite goaltender maybe he once was, but I still think he could crank it up to that level for 5 or 6 games. And the Leafs, that one too was they have goaltending issues. They have issues in their roster. I think it's all an absolute coin flip. Zach, Is there a move out there for either the Leafs, the Jets, the Oilers, the Habs, that one of those teams can make that would separate them from the pack, in your opinion? Or do you think it could be a quiet deadline here in Canada?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think there's two moves that I could see having real implications. First being Ekholm to Winnipeg. I think he makes that team a lot better right away, and that defense corps definitely a lot scarier. On top of that, I think maybe a move for a goaltender for either Toronto or Edmonton. One guy I was kind of thinking of was like a Chris Drieger type. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not, but he's still a young goaltender. He's small sample size, but he's shown pretty well in his brief time in the NHL. So I think Toronto should be goalie shopping. I think they got some real concerns there with Freddie's injury, and Jack Campbell will come back down to earth at some point sooner rather than later.
Mistaken Mexican in the Twitch chat says Winnipeg would be the best team for the Oilers to play, would be entertaining, and doesn't look like they'll be getting a high-end D-man like Ekholm. I think they're making a push for Savard. Like, they're obviously not getting Ekholm now, but I think, like, if I'm Winnipeg, I'm looking at my blue line, I'm looking at Connor Hellebuck between the pipes, I'm looking at my depth up front, and I'm going, if I get a defenseman at the deadline, like, this is all of a sudden a pretty solid team here. And, like, all these teams, I think, should go into the deadline with the approach of, this might be the easiest chance any of us have to make it to the Final Four. Like, you can... If any team can realistically beat any team, you could blink and be like, holy shit, we're in the conference finals, essentially. Sticking with the Oilers, I'll come to you first on this one, Josh. This is our last show before the trade deadline. We have heard a few rumblings around the Oilers, but nothing major. I'm going to ask you guys each two questions. The first one, the most realistic deadline target for the Edmonton Oilers. Not your dream scenario, but realistically, when we do this show in a week, who could we be talking about the Oilers acquiring?
I think it's a mainstream answer, and I think it's one that a lot of people would agree on. I think the most realistic acquisition for the Edmonton Oilers at this point would be a third line, probably a right shot center. I think that's the most realistic thing you're looking at. Kyle Turris didn't really fill that role necessarily that Ken Holland thought he was going to be for this team coming into this season. So, unless Kyle Turris can get going in that role, I think, we've heard the name of Luke Glendening get tossed around out of Detroit. Even a guy like Brandon Sutter out of Vancouver. Who knows what's going on with that situation with that team? We wish them the best, obviously, but who knows if they're even going to be available for shopping or selling at the deadline. But a dream scenario, I think all Edmonton Oilers fans can agree with me on this one. Zach, I do agree that there are teams that could be on the hunt for a goaltender. I think with just the plethora of UFA goalies we're going to see in this offseason, I think realistically, goalies getting dealt at the deadline, I just don't know if it's going to happen, because these general managers are going to see how many UFA goalies are going to be available this offseason. So I would say dream scenario for me would absolutely be a top line or a second line left winger. You got to get a top or a second line scoring left winger. I think one piece that this Edmonton Oilers team is missing that we see a lot of teams have is just a big body in that top six that can score and just have a physical presence. Pierre-Luc Dubois, I'm so jealous of the Jets that they got him in exchange for Patrick Laine. I just feel like the Oilers need a guy like that can play on the second line, because if you end up having to put McDry together, listen, I don't want to be a negative when it comes to the Ryan Nugent-Hopkins train here, but I don't know if we've seen enough out of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins this year to say, okay, he could realistically drive play 5-on-5 on his own line come the playoffs. So, second line scoring left winger, that would be dream scenario for me at the deadline.
But realistically, likely Luke Glendening. Zach, give me your most realistic deadline target, or maybe a couple realistic deadline targets, and then a dream scenario.
Yeah, I think, maybe some depth up in the forward group. Derek Ryan. I think trading anything for Luke Glendening would be a horrible deal for the Oilers. Yeah, I really do. Like, he is terrible possession-wise. His goal rates are absolutely awful. And yes, he could win face-offs this year, but winning face-offs doesn't win you games. It's the play beyond that, right? So I'd rather have a guy like Gaetan Haas or a Kyra type down there and that sort of a thing. So I do think, however, it isn't terribly unrealistic for the Oilers to go after and get a Derek Ryan type or something like that. And I totally agree with Josh, too. Like, I think going for a guy like a Taylor Hall type is exactly what the Oilers need. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has never been a guy who can drive play really well on his own. He's like an elite, like, secondary player on a line.
Yeah.
He's always needed, like, that Taylor Hall type to play with them, or the Draisaitl type, or the McDavid type, right? And that's partially because Nugent Hopkins is more of a defensive forward too, right? Like he excels in his own end. So I think, you know, something like that would be great to see for Edmonton. I think the price is never going to be lower on a Taylor Hall. You know, he's got what, 2 goals and a 2% shooting percentage.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you're never going to be able to get him for a second round pick and a mid level prospect like I think they'll go for now. So I think the Oilers should absolutely be on it.
Hall's interesting to me because he's a UFA, and I don't know if Ken Holland wants to give up much for a UFA, even though that cost could be lower than it's ever been. I'm not sure if I want the Oilers going all in on a UFA. My realistic names, like Holland loves Luke Glendening. Back in their days in Detroit, he loved Luke Glendening. And I think back to that Chicago series where, like, there were a couple goals in that series that the Hawks scored, like, bang, right off a faceoff. And I think Holland, you know, sometimes GMs do this. I think he's maybe remembering that too much. And he's going, I want to prevent that from happening. And even if you're Dave Tippett, like, I think if you can have a guy, like, he wins draws and he shoots right, and if he can be a 60% guy on that side of the ice in the final minute of a game, like, I think Dave Tippett would really like to have that. Would I like Glendening more than Gaetan Haas? Probably not. Would I like Glendening more than Derek Ryan? Like, the numbers would probably say Derek Ryan's the much better player, right, Zach?
Very much so.
I wonder if he's as good of, like, you know, a penalty killer. And I heard Holland today on 630 Ched talking about how if you're not killing penalties or playing on the power play, you're getting 7 to 9 minutes at most. So if the difference between Glendening and Ryan is whatever you're losing at 5-on-5 for like 7 minutes a game, but you're getting like a much better penalty killer who you really, really trust in the final minute, that's where I lean towards maybe Glendening being a better realistic target. But I mean, I really hope. I read an article and there was like a second round pick for Glendening, and it's like, if you're giving up a second for Glendening, then yeah, just go give up the first for Taylor Hall at that point and get the actual like contributing player. But if you can get Glendening for a 4th or a 5th at the deadline, I look at that as like a Tyler Ennis level insurance policy last year where, yeah, he's probably going to play for you, but I mean, even if he doesn't, you're not like screwing yourself out of an important asset. Yeah, I think that's where I'm at.
Part of the issue I have with the Glendening type too is that his isolated numbers, he doesn't bring any value anywhere on the ice. Offensively, he's 11% below league average. Defense, he's 1% below league average, which isn't terrible, right? But on the penalty kill, he provides value at a 5% rate worse than league average. So, you know, to me, that says that, you know, you're really not bringing in a guy that's going to help you in any area of the ice except the faceoff circle. Does Dave Tippett value a guy in the faceoff circle? Probably. Will the Oilers trade for Glendening? Probably. Because that's the type of coach that Tippett is, right? He is that. Well, he's the lunchbox guy, right? So
there's one thing we've seen out of Dave Tippett in the past is that he puts a lot of value in guys in the bottom 6 that can either A, kill penalties, or B, take faceoffs in their own end. You know, we've seen Tyler Ennis and how he's kind of gotten the short end of the stick on a few occasions here because of the fact that he doesn't do either of those things. You know, on one given night, we can see Tyler Ennis playing on the second line with Leon Draisaitl and Kyler Yamamoto. And then on the next night, we can see him on the taxi squad because if he's playing in the bottom 6, he doesn't kill penalties and he doesn't take faceoffs. And there's 300 other guys on this Oilers team that can do both of those things, that can bring, I wouldn't necessarily say as much value in the bottom 6 because, yeah, Tyler Ennis is a skilled player. But the fact that he doesn't do either of those things is automatically going to push him down the depth chart if you're talking about the bottom 6. So Luke Glendening, I don't know. Zach, Tyler, does he kill penalties? I have no.
He will, but
no
like
idea.
Zach said, maybe he's not a league average penalty killer according to the numbers. But I just think like
so
if Holland is sitting in a meeting with Dave Tippett, I feel like Tippett, if he's looking at Derek Ryan and Luke Glendening, he might look at that the same way he looks at Tyler Ennis and Devin Shore for some reason. Where like Tyler Ennis is the more talented hockey player. Tyler Ennis probably has a better chance of scoring you goals, but he seems to trust Shore more. I think it's almost like a Lagesson-Jones debate as well, where like there is no denying who the more talented hockey player is between Lagesson and Jones.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason,
last night.
Dave Tippett feels safer on the ice when William Lagesson's there instead of Caleb Jones. And like you maybe don't agree with that, but I think there's something to be said about having players a coach can trust. I don't know.
Yeah. And I thought it was kind of ironic last night that there was a lot of people that said, you know, why the heck are the Oilers putting Tyler Ennis on waivers? All of a sudden, okay, he clears waivers. Yeah. We're in the clear with that. And then automatically there were people that were like, why the heck is Devin Shore in the lineup over top of Tyler Ennis. And while A, Devin Shore can take faceoffs if he needs to, and B, he kills penalties. And Dave Tippett, 99% of the time, is going to defer to those guys rather than a skilled small player like Tyler Ennis. It's just how it is. So that's why I think, with what we've seen out of Dave Tippett and Ken Holland, I honestly, at this point, the chances of them trading for Luke Glendening, I would say, are probably more likely than not, just because of what we've seen out of Dave Tippett and Ken Holland and the type of players that they defer to. Like, Luke Glendening perfectly fits that description of the type of players that they always defer to.
Yeah, where there's smoke, there's fire. And we have seen so much smoke between Glendening and the Edmonton Oilers. Zach, I have another question.
He used to drive them in Detroit.
Yeah, they go back. They go way, way back. There's another question I want to ask you, Zach. But first, my dream fit would be Rickard Rakell. I think a right shooting left winger. Like, he could be in that one-time spot on the top power play unit, which would be deadly. I think he could help drive play on a line with Nugent Hopkins if you want to put McDavid and Draisaitl together. Or he could be like an elite finisher for Connor McDavid. I'm worried, though, because the asking price is probably like a first and Holloway, and there's no way I'm giving up a first and Holloway. But if the ask was like a first and Samurikov or something like that, I'd probably do that for Rickard Rakell at this year's deadline, even though you'd be screwing yourself out of like the first 3 rounds of the draft this year. Rickard Rakell is my absolute dream fit. I just have a funny feeling he's not going anywhere at this year's deadline. Zach, I want to ask you this. I've asked you it a few times, but I want to know if your take's changed at all. Game 1 of the playoffs, knowing what you know now, who are the pairings and who are the 6 defensemen in the Oilers lineup? Who should they be, in your opinion? Not who it will be, because I think we kind of have a general idea who it would be, but who should, in your opinion, those 60 men be?
You're going to have to go Nurse Barry on the top pairing, obviously.
Yeah, it's kind of a lock now.
Right? It's kind of a lock. Second pairing is hard. I mean, it's somebody in Larson, right? Yeah. Probably Chris Russell and Larson. And then third pairing, I think Jones Bear absolutely is the way to go. And I'd even consider them more of a second pair than a third pairing too, right? Because they have that ability to move the puck. And I thought, Caleb Jones was on the ice for his second goal against in the entire since the beginning of March against Montreal, and Dave Tippett went back to him even though he was out there for the goal against, which really to me shows that there's some growing confidence in what Caleb Jones is doing. So I think that's probably the top 6 that they'll run with. I'd love to see a guy like Evan Bouchard in there over almost anybody, but you got to be realistic about it, and it's just not happening this year, right? So I think top 6 though, you go Nurse Barry, Jones Bear, Russell Larson.
Is there anything to be said about having a puck mover on each pairing and trying out one more time, going with Jones and Larson as a pairing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they've been good together.
That too. Yeah, I think they would be as well. Chris Russell and Ethan Bear didn't look horrible together. A guy like Bear can make up for the deficiencies in Chris Russell's game and will allow Russell to block shots or do whatever he does, right? But I think you're going to have that group that can move the puck out, and for some reason Dave Tippett seems to believe that Chris Russell's a really good puck moving defenseman. I don't know why, but he's not. But it's something that he said a couple times that he believes in him. So, but that's a really good question. I think you could go either way and be okay with it.
Josh, what would you do in terms of, I'm assuming Nurse and Barry are locked in almost everyone's opinion, but how would you handle the kind of final 4 D-men here in the lineup?
Yeah, Nurse Barry is going to stay on my top pair for sure. You put up a good point with having a puck-moving defenseman more so than Chris Russell on that second pairing. I think that obviously Adam Larson is kind of your number 1 shutdown defender right now, especially with Oscar Klefbom out of the lineup. That's what Adam Larson brings to this team. That's his game, is being a shutdown defender in his own end. So, is having Chris Russell with him kind of a safety blanket for Chris Russell in his own end? The fact that he plays with such a strong shutdown defender, yeah, maybe. Is Bear necessarily that much far off than Larson? I wouldn't say it's completely 2 different defensemen out to lunch, but Ethan Bear is definitely not close to the defender that Adam Larson is. I wouldn't say by any means.
Well, he gets you out of trouble. I think they get you out of trouble in different ways. Like, Bear's going to get you out of trouble moving the puck. Larson's going to get you out of the trouble when he lays a cross-check into someone's C4 vertebrae and knocks him to the ice, right?
Exactly, and that's why I'm not a big guy on Legason right now. I liked Legason at the beginning of the season, but I don't necessarily see Lagesson starting the playoffs in this top six in regards to these defensive pairings. I like Russell Larson together. I don't have a problem if you want to swap him and Jones, whether you want to have more of a puck moving defender with each Larson and Bear, or sorry, each Bear, or you know what I mean? Swapping the two pairings. But I think Nurse Berry on the top, obviously. And then, Russell Larson, probably the second pair. Maybe you swap him and Jones, talking about Russell. But I think it's pretty much set in stone, and we can all agree that it's going to be Nurse Berry and then Russell Larson, Jones Bear, one of the two combinations in that bottom four. Because I think that Caleb Jones, and we saw it last night. Listen, I've been hard on Caleb Jones in the past when people talk about the analytics and how amazing of a defender he is. But we saw last night he brings a certain element to the game when it comes to just having a certain touch when it comes to finessing in his own end. So
Canadian Barbarian 98 says the numbers show Nurse Berry is not actually good and abysmal away from Connor. He went on to say he'd run Nurse with Bear, Jones with Larson, Russell with Barry. The thing is, I totally see the Tyson Barrie can be sometimes a bit of a tire fire in his own end. I don't think there's a left shot defenseman I trust to play him with that's not Darnell Nurse. I just think the two of them, they do work together, and Nurse does more to help Barrie than vice versa, because you could probably get away with Nurse Bear, and you might get better numbers with Nurse and Bear, in my opinion. But I don't think Barry Russell gives you as good of numbers as Bear Russell. I think in terms of creating a balanced decor, you almost need to have Nurse and Bear playing on separate pairings.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what the person said in the comment section there too. The expected goals numbers for Nurse and Barry, 47% versus an actual goals percentage of 66%, right? They're getting the McDry bump, right? Yeah. But you're right. There's no left shot defenseman I would rather have Tyson Barrie with than Darnell Nurse. Could you Chris Russell? No way. Caleb Jones?
I wouldn't do that.
Sense. I wouldn't do that either, right? And then you talk about, well, maybe a guy like Ethan Bear would be great with Barrie, but then somebody has to play on their upside, which isn't exactly
we saw how that can work sometimes.
Exactly, right? So it's kind of a difficult situation, but I think the Oilers are absolutely locked in for Barrie.
Let's wrap this up with some chatter about the upcoming Ottawa games. They're playing tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday, which makes no sense, but I'm here for it. I'm going to be crushing Nation beers at 2 o'clock tomorrow as soon as I'm done with all my pregame stuff. For people with normal jobs, I don't think you would like a 3 o'clock start in the afternoon, but for us, I think this is great. Zach, you excited for a 3 p.m. game tomorrow?
Oh, man, I've been waiting all season for afternoon hockey games.
I love afternoon games.
All damn season. So, yeah, I'm fired right up for it.
Josh, can the Oilers in the next 2 nights make it 9 in a row against the Ottawa Senators? That's insane. 9 wins in a row for an NHL team?
I think there's a certain pride you take if you're the Edmonton Oilers, if you can have a season sweep against the Ottawa Senators. We heard rumblings at the beginning of the season from some certain media members that, Ottawa was going to be that free tick on the bingo chart. But all of a sudden now Ottawa has beaten every other team in the North Division except for the Edmonton Oilers. So I think if you're the Oilers, you take a little bit of pride in that and say, okay, we're going to take these games. We're going to win these games that we should be winning and bank these points and keep on chugging on to the end of the season here.
Can they make it 9 in a row, Zach?
Oh, absolutely. I don't see any way that Ottawa wins one of these games. Would I be surprised if they did? I wouldn't be, because they're still a pretty gritty team, but I want to see the 9-0.
I think it'll happen, too. It'll be fun. Oilers minus 1.5 for everyone in the next 2 nights. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Thanks to everyone who was active in the Twitch chat as well. This has been State of the Nation. A little bit later than usual, granted. But like I said, better late than never. We'll talk again next Tuesday to wrap up